A straightforward question of political will or lack of resources. Rich countries have received almost 10 times more in bailout money in 1 year than poor countries have received in aid in half a century. What will it take for developed nations to honour their commitments to the world's poor? Or is it more important to save the world's richest economies first? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Nick Clark. Welcome to the programme. $18 trillion over 1 year to save the world financial system. Just $2 trillion over 50 years to save people from poverty and hunger worldwide. There is a huge gulf between the two, and now it's getting bigger. Aid money is drying up because it's being diverted into bailout packages. According to the United Nations Millennium campaign, at least 50,000 people die every single day because of poverty. Rich countries have pledged plenty of aid, but little has been delivered. A lack of cash has been cited as a cause, and yet staggering amounts have been raised to save ailing economies. Last week, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon urged donor nations to make no further excuses and urgently deliver on their aid commitments.
By some estimates, annual aid to Africa is at least $20 billion below the promises made in Green Eagles in 2005. Surely, if the world can mobilize more than $18 trillion to keep the financial sector afloat, it can find more than $18 billion to keep commitments to Africa.
Ban Ki-moon, is it all about political will? A question likely to come up as the world's 8 richest countries, the G8, meet next week in Italy. And it is, of course, a question that we're taking head on right now. And joining us to do so are, in New York, Salil Shetty, who's director of the United Nations Millennium Campaign, which monitors efforts of governments to reach the Millennium Development Goals to eradicate world poverty and its root causes by the year 2015. Also in New York, Michael Hudson, president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trends. And in London, David Buick, analyst and partner at BGC Partners. That's a world-leading financial brokerage firm. Gentlemen, all welcome. David Buick, let's start with you. Here's the thing. All right, banks, financial institutions and so forth need bailing out, but why renege on aid commitments to poor countries? We're talking about relatively small amounts of money after all, aren't we? And more people are dying in poverty than ever because of the economic crisis that the rich created.
Nick, I can't argue with a single word you've said. What I find personally tragic is that when the years were good, up until 2 years ago, the previous decade, was the time when this sort of money should have been available for countries that needed it badly, emerging nations with poverty, hunger, deprivation, all the things you need. And now, of course, with the mature world, with want of a better expression, absolutely struggling to keep its head above the waterline, I'm afraid they're not going to get the consideration and the respect that they deserve. Because I think we've got a situation here, Nick, where it's called needs must. And if the banking sector around the world isn't fixed, however disgracefully some of the behavior has been in terms of abuse of privilege and power, then we're never going to get the world's economy back on its feet. So $18 trillion, $25 trillion, whatever it is, I'm afraid whatever happens, the banking sector, it is without any question of any doubt the artery of the economic recovery. And if it's not fixed over a period of 2 years, I fear for the whole world.
All right, Salil Shetty, the artery of economic recovery and needs must. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody's arguing that, we have to sort things out. But, it's like if you're having a patient who's about to die and then, as you're going to the hospital, then we can't have a discussion as to whether you need oxygen, whether you need, first aid. That's not the issue. We really have to go behind it and understand what's causing the problem. Why have we got ourselves in this situation? And I think David would agree that, we've had a situation where there's been a serious lack of regulation and a serious ethical and integrity deficit in the way that some of the richest people in the richest countries have behaved. And as a result, we are now facing a major crisis for the poorest people in the poorest countries who didn't have anything to do with this problem. And let's not forget that this is coming on top of a food crisis, a fuel crisis, and an ongoing climate crisis. So that's the kind of context in which we're having this conversation. And my argument is not about whether we can give the bailouts or whether we can give aid. I believe that we have enough resources if we want to address both these questions. And as far as poor countries are concerned, it's really peanuts we're talking about.
Yeah, that's the thing, David Buick, isn't it? I mean, the amount rich countries have pledged is minuscule compared to the amounts they've raised for this bailout. I mean, surely they can afford it.
Well, I mean, I understand entirely the rationale stated, and as I said, it's what happened in the previous decade, not the previous 2 years. It's been like trying to get blood out of a stone out of these rich nations who could easily have afforded to make generous contributions where the whole world would have benefited as a result of sensible planning in terms of making annual contributions to the situation. But it simply didn't happen. But when you look at, say, for instance, the United States of America, which many people, right or wrong, consider to be the barometer of society in terms of how the world is going to recover, if President Obama was suddenly to make an enormous contribution when its own country is seeing 10% unemployment looking to go north and the economy a long way from recovery, I think the reaction would be conceivably very adverse. And the problem is, it's political. It's not so much humane, it's just political. It's keeping your head above water. And I think that is the main criteria and the main problem at the moment.
So Michael Hudson, been like trying to get blood out of a stone, providing aid to poor countries in the past, and now there are more pressing problems, and that is to fix the world's ailing economies.
Well, my field is balance of payments economics, and I think there's a great accounting fiction in talking about foreign aid. The United States has not given a dollar of foreign aid for the last 40 years. Under U.S. law, it's illegal for the United States to give a single dollar of aid to any foreign country because of the balance of payments crisis. What the United States gives is farm surpluses, if it gives aid, that aid all remains in the United States economy. Under the congressional law, American foreign aid can only go to help American farmers, American firms, and American banks. For instance, America will give food to third world countries. The effect and the intention of giving this food is to prevent foreign countries from feeding themselves, to prevent their farmers from finding a domestic market. When the United States gives food aid under PL 480, for instance, not only is the money paid to the American farmers, but the foreign countries have to give a counterpart local currency that the U.S. government then uses for its own embassy expenses or anything it wants. When the United States gives money to a third world government to pay its foreign debts, this money is transferred from the U.S. Treasury to the foreign government account in the United States directly into the account of Chase Manhattan, Citibank, or the other bank creditor. So the money that is ostensibly given to African and Latin American countries, in fact, never leaves the United States at all. It all stays here. So it helps to start with, if you talk about the U.S. giving $0 in foreign aid, there is no balance of payments cost whatsoever. That's the law.
Let me just jump in there. Just given the current economic crisis and taking David Buick's point into account, do you think that the need to fix the current economic crisis is more important than providing poorer countries who are suffering because of the economic crisis right now?
This is a false dichotomy because the United States has greatly aggravated the economic crisis by the bank bailouts. The Republicans in America, for instance, are completely against the bailout. I was against the bailout. The bailout did not help the banks. What we have is a debt crisis of debt in excess of people's ability to pay. People owe more mortgage debt than their property's worth. The debtors weren't helped. The bailouts were given to, the largest bailout was to the AIG, the insurance company, to pay hedge fund gamblers. $183 billion just to pay hedge funds on Wall Street gambles. This is not helping people. It's not helping the economy. It's helping casino capitalism. And this $183 billion was given to create a new financial class that's going to be the new power elite that will be dominating the American economy for the next century. This has made the crisis much worse. So there really isn't any conflict between helping the bank bailouts and foreign aid. The bank bailouts hurt hurt the economy. Foreign aid is never really gets to foreign countries at all. It's all to help American farmers and large companies.
Okay, let's bring in Sunil Shetty. Sarah, I can see that you look like a man who's keen to jump in.
Okay. Yeah, Nick, can I just, the question you asked earlier was, which comes first, which one's more important? I mean, just take this question of swine flu, yeah, because in the middle of the financial crisis, we had to deal with this swine flu pandemic. And it's fascinating that suddenly the discussion started going into the, why is the swine flu happen? How do we fix the Mexican health system? And my point is we don't have to wait for swine flu to address Mexico's health system. And that's what the Millennium Development Goals are about. We know what needs to be done. The leaders have promised that they will do it. And I must say, it's not just leaders in rich countries. Leaders in poor countries have to also do what they've committed themselves to do, which is to provide, sound, accountable governance and meet the needs of poor people. The fact of the matter is, as we speak, developing country economies are coming crashing down. I'm not saying all of them, but a significant number of them. The growth rate in developing countries has gone down from 7.7% 2 years ago to 1.2% estimated this year. And this means real damage to the economy. 84 out of the 109 developing countries are expecting a financing gap as a result. We're losing jobs. 100,000 people have lost jobs in DRC, 30,000 in the textile sector in Cambodia. And all of this is not just about, macroeconomic, impacts. It's impact on lives of poor people. I mean, the FAO is estimating 1 billion people are going to be hungry. The World Bank has estimated 200 to 400,000 more children under the age of 1 dying as a result of the crisis. So I think, that means we could lose about 3 million children's lives extra because of the crisis. So I don't think it's for us now to sit and keep talking about things. The G8 leaders are meeting in 2 weeks' time. This show, I think, should give them a clear message as to what we want them to do when they meet in 2 weeks' time.
But do you think the donor countries are serious about aid altogether?
Well, I think, for us, it's not just a question of a charitable sense of giving aid. We are saying that, for a multiple set of reasons, we've come to understand that the world's problems that, we have, the emerging problems of the world, whether it's climate crisis, whether it's a financial crisis, whether it's a poverty crisis, we cannot solve it alone. We have to solve it collectively. And aid is not the only one, but it's an important component of what could solve the problem. And the richest countries have made promises themselves. Nobody forced them to make the promises in Gleneagles. But they're already $20 to $30 billion short of the commitments they made just 4 years ago, at a time when the need has never been greater. So we're asking them to, first of all, keep the commitments they've made. 2 weeks' time, they should give a year-by-year annualized timetable of what they're going to deliver to poor countries. They need to eliminate agricultural subsidies completely, and I think, the previous speaker spoke about the harmful effects of this. So it's not just aid, it's trade as well. And aid is not just volume, but quality. I mean, the quality of a lot of the money they give is really bad. There's promises made in the Paris Declaration, the Accra Agenda, etc., but they don't deliver that. So I think a trade deal which will help poor countries, keeping aid commitments and improving the quality of aid, that's what we need from the G8 leaders in 2 weeks' time. And if they don't keep that commitment, I think the problem is not going to be so much only for poor countries. It's going to come back to bite rich countries as well.
All right, let's just take a moment for a second just to consider this, at this point, that many rich countries believe developing countries lose a good chunk of aid money to mismanagement and corruption. It's certainly true in many cases, but not always so. If we look at Ghana, for example, according to the World Bank, financial aid gave Ghana economic growth of more than 7% in the last year, and Tanzania has averaged 6% in the last 9 years. Pretty big achievements by African standards. And my point is this to Mr. Buick. You have to ask, can rich countries point fingers at poor nations for mismanaging money? I mean, the global financial crisis originated in the rich countries, and it was a direct result of bad lending practices.
Not really, Nick, no. As I say, any plans that go on now, to go to this meeting next week and start banging the table saying it's a disgrace, we've got to do something about it. You've got to have a plan for the next 10 years. Having woefully failed for the last 10 years, it'd be hopeful that they would lose from that mistake, because I think that is absolutely fundamental. The most important thing is life is beautiful, and it should be beautiful for everybody. So to have a knee-jerk reaction just to get the right soundbite at some meeting next week would be just insane. We've had a situation in the last 2 years when the system broke down. Greenspan allowed a situation where money was lent indiscriminately by banks without any regulatory control. We suffered. Unfortunately, it wasn't left there. because instead of being consistent with their program, once, of course, Hank Paulson bailed Bear Stearns out, and then another one, and he for some reason turned around and said when Lehman Brothers problem came up, no, we're not doing that. That exacerbated the situation probably by double, and it almost certainly made the losses on every single bank twice what they would have been. And that's the problem where we're paying for this mess. This is all about planning, in my opinion, in the next 5 to 10 years, not a knee-jerk reaction.
All right, so mismanagement on that side of things, and also mismanagement at the other end. Mr. Michael Hudson, not a great record for the management of aid coming into the poorer countries, is there?
I think that's exactly the point. And as the gentleman from Britain pointed out, what we really should be discussing at the outset is what is aid? Is it aid if the United States gives a third world country money to pay the U.S. banks for debts that it simply can't pay? Wouldn't it be better simply for the third world country to say, we can't pay these bank debts, we're annulling them so that we can live? Our living in the real economy is more important than Wall Street. Your previous speaker says Wall Street's more important. That's absolutely wrong. The real economy is more important, not the financial sector, not the wealthy people. The people that were bailed out by Lehman Brothers and by Bear Stearns and by AIG were hedge funds investors. In order in America to be an investor, to even qualify for bailout, you have to sign a legal document saying you can afford to lose the money, that you're a millionaire. You can afford to lose all the money you've gambled and you won't be hurt at all. The government, therefore, has bailed out people who said they don't need the money, that they can get by quite fine without it, and it has not helped at all the people who actually need the money, the debtors. What we're seeing is an international war of creditors against debtors, and the U.S. government, the British government, the European community is using foreign aid as a lever to twist the aid recipients to follow the policies, the trade policies and the financial policies that the Washington Consensus supports. And it's not simply that the World Bank and the IMF is corrupt, it's that their concept of what is aid has hurt these countries. The concept of telling them, don't grow food, grow plantation export crops. We will only lend you for export production, not to feed your own people. That's the real problem, and that's so much more important than local corruption that people tend to lose sight of the fact that what's called aid isn't really aid at all.
Okay, let's put that to Salil Shetty. Sir, we should think less about dollars and more about trade regulation.
No, I think the beauty, Nick, of the Millennium Development Goals, which were signed by 189 heads of state in this very building where I'm sitting now at the United Nations in September 2000, was that was based on a realization that we can't keep blaming each other for our problems. We're on a planet which is, in crisis, and that we have to have a sense of mutual responsibility, collective responsibility, and mutual accountability. So the deal of the Millennium Development Goals was, and that really is what we're asking for G8 leaders to deliver on. First of all, rich countries have to keep their existing aid commitments. They've committed to 0.7% of their GDP going to aid. They've committed to improving the quality of aid, which is a lot of what the previous speaker was talking about, because there's no point having volume of aid if the quality is not okay. I mean, the point about giving poor countries the policy space, the decision-making power to make their own policies is central. That's all part of the quality of aid. We don't need new debts coming as a result of the financial crisis. We've just about had 40 countries seeing debt cancellation. So any new money should be going as grants. So that's the second component. And the third component is trade. I cannot agree more that unless we have a fair trade deal, unless we eliminate agricultural subsidies, we are not going to achieve these goals. So that's what the rich countries should do. But much as we can justify some of the corruption, saying this is because of rich countries' bad policies. But the fact is that the leaders in Africa and Asia and Latin America, they need to get their house in order. We have to protect MDG, Millennium Development Goal related expenditure, pro-poor expenditure. We need to make sure that the money reaches the poor. I think, this is the collective bargain. And I think, we can complain about aid, but the fact is, over the last several years, 40 million more kids are going to school. We've saved at least 2 to 3 million lives of children. It's not only because of aid, but aid has helped. You take a country like Liberia now, as we speak. Liberia, which is one of the better managed countries where aid has made a difference just in the last 2-3 years, they were seeing a surplus of 0.5% of the GDP in their budget. And now, because of the crisis, we are seeing a 16% deficit. So I think the G8 leaders need to act quickly. Some of these things are irreversible. If children are malnourished, you can't sort it out later on. If children are hungry, you have to address this today.
Let me jump in there. I just want to pick up on one thing that you were talking about there, the fair trade deals. Mr. Buick, in London, fair trade deals, is that something that would go down well in the financial world?
Yes, I think coupled with getting back, just if I may, having been accused of being pro-Wall Street and anti-other ideas, that's not true. I'm just interested in being pragmatic and fixing what is a very badly damaged system. Because if it's not fixed, then we're never going to get the economy of the world back on song, and therefore the emerging nations who so desperately require this aid, I'm afraid whether I like it or not, will go to the back of the queue. And that is wildly unfair, and I hope it doesn't happen. And I think the idea of dealing with it through trade is a very sensible contribution, but I don't think it's the be and end all.
Yeah, Michael Hudson, we've come full circle, haven't we? The bottom line is we have to fix this huge, enormous crisis that's affecting everything.
Well, life isn't fair, and the economy isn't fair, and especially politics isn't fair. And because any foreign aid, like any bailout, is going to be done by politicians, you can expect their aid not to be fair, and you can expect the bailout not to be fair. In America, they could have used this in England, they could have used the 18 trillion that you talked about to buy all of the debts owed by the debtors, by the middle class, by the poor people. They could have freed them completely for debt. They didn't give a penny of that to the debtors. They gave it all to the creditors to compensate them for the bad loans. This isn't fair. So I don't think there's any attempt by politicians in any country to be fair. They're trying to help their constituencies, and their constituencies are the people who contribute money to their political campaigns, and these tend to be Wall Street, the financial classes, the real estate sector, the sectors who don't want aid and who don't want development. So I don't expect to see any increase in aid at all. I think that countries like Latvia and the Baltic countries, Iceland, are in just as bad a condition as third world countries. I think that you'll be fooling yourself if you expect the United States and Europe to give real foreign aid. They're only going to help their own leading political vested interests.
All right, Salil Shetty, that's a pretty pessimistic view of things, I have to say. Challenge coming up at the summit meeting that we've been talking about at the G8 in G8 countries in Italy later this week. Are we going to see, is there any room for optimism, or are we going to be banging our head against this proverbial brick wall?
No. I mean, I think, that at the end of the day, I think David's absolutely right that, or was it Michael was absolutely right that, it boils down to a political choice, a leadership decision that we are looking for. And at the end of the day, in spite of the failures of democracy and that leaders are not accountable enough, the only voice they have to listen to is the voice of the people, their voters. And when we've seen increases in aid, when we've seen through the Jubilee debt campaign, the debt cancellation, all of this has happened because citizens have put pressure on the leaders, and that's going to happen around the G8. In poor countries, the majority of their voters are poor people. So, I don't think the leaders have a choice. The voice is clear. Last year, we did something called the Stand Up Against Poverty, Stand Up for the Goals, and we had 116 million people joining us. We're going to repeat that between October 16 and 18 this year. I think if the leaders can't hear the voices of poor people, they're going to be in trouble when it comes to elections. Every survey we do in the rich countries tells us, by ordinary people, even the people who are suffering through the financial crisis, they always say that they want their leaders to help the poorest people. I mean, I think everybody has a human side to them, and they know it's not just charity, but it's also a matter of having a more even playing field. Unless we work in it together, all of us are going to sink. So it's a kind of a sink or swim situation. And I think there's enough and more resources. The leaders need to understand it, that their people are behind it, that the people want resources to go to the poorest communities, and the poor country leaders need to make sure it happens. So I'm much more optimistic.
Okay, well, that's a pretty clear message. Our time, I'm afraid, is done, gentlemen. We appreciate your perspectives on this. Salil Shetty, Michael Hudson and David Buick, thank you all very much indeed. And thank you for watching Inside Story. Always delighted, of course, to receive your thoughts and views. Just send us an email, insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, it's goodbye.